The camera drifts over a world that no longer exists. Glaciers, the height of skyscrapers, stretch from horizon to horizon, their jagged faces glinting in the pale light of a sun dimmed by atmospheric haze. Great herds of mammoth and bison move in dark masses across windswept plains. This is Earth 14,000 years ago, an alien planet that just happens to be our own. Mainstream history books give this era a simple label: the tail end of the last ice age, a time before civilization. The story we all learned is clear. Humans then were scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, wandering from camp to camp, living in the margins between ice and tundra. Cities, impossible. Architecture, beyond imagining. Complex societies, unthinkable. The world, we're told, was too harsh, too unstable, and too primitive for such ambition. But there are cracks in that story. For decades, archaeologists, divers, and geologists have stumbled upon sites that shouldn't exist: stone walls far beneath the sea, megalithic structures on windswept plateaus, and artifacts that suggest a mastery of engineering far beyond what nomadic tribes should have been capable of. They don't fit the neat, linear progression of human history that modern academia prefers. They are the whispers of another chapter, one written in a language of stone and myth, and buried, sometimes literally, beneath miles of earth or ocean. The official narrative tells us civilization began around 6,000 years ago with the Sumerians, and that anything before that is a slow crawl from animal survival toward agriculture. But when you follow the evidence others ignore, a different story begins to take shape. A story of advanced cultures thriving during the Ice Age, building permanent settlements, navigating oceans, and mapping the stars, only to vanish in a cataclysm that erased them from memory. In this documentary, we will journey into that shadowed past. We'll visit Göbekli Tepe, whose intricately carved pillars stand older than Stonehenge by millennia. We'll plunge beneath the waves to explore the Yonaguni Monument off Japan's coast, whose terraces and stairways seem too deliberate to be nature's work. We'll trek into the Andes to confront megaliths so precisely cut they seem to defy the tools of their supposed builders. And we'll weigh the scientific evidence, geological, genetic, astronomical, against the skepticism of the gatekeepers of history. This is not the romantic fantasy of lost continents told in pulp novels. This is a forensic investigation into humanity's deep past, an excavation not only of ancient ruins, but of our own cultural memory. Because if these cities existed before the Ice Age ended, then everything we know about the human story is incomplete. To understand the stakes, picture the Earth at that time: sea levels over 100 meters lower than today, coastlines stretching far beyond their modern reach. Great river valleys, now flooded with salt water, were once fertile basins where humans could have settled, farmed, and traded. If a civilization rose in those places, its ruins are now drowned, its foundations buried beneath centuries of silt. To find them is not just archaeology, it's resurrection. And there's another reason this story matters. For centuries, myths from cultures around the world have told of a great flood, of golden ages before the waters came, of cities swallowed by the sea. Modern scholars dismiss these as allegories or moral tales. But what if they are eyewitness accounts, passed down through generations of real events during the violent end of the Ice Age? The people in those stories might not have been primitives huddling in caves. They might have been citizens, engineers, astronomers, and survivors. The contrast between the official history and these tantalizing possibilities is at the heart of this investigation. On one side is the established timeline, slow, methodical, and resistant to change. On the other are the fragments of an older world, scattered like bones in the dust, daring us to fit them together. As we move through this journey, you will notice a pattern. The deeper we dig, the more the past refuses to behave. Sites turn out to be older than previously thought. Artifacts reveal skills their makers should not have possessed, and in some cases, the evidence disappears, not into the sea or the sand, but into locked storage rooms and forgotten archives. quietly removed from public discussion. This is the prologue to a hidden epic. The last ice age did not end in a slow fade, it ended in chaos. Around 12,800 years ago, the planet was plunged back into near-glacial conditions in the blink of a geological eye. Whether caused by comet fragments striking the ice sheets, or by other cataclysmic forces, the result was the same: floods, fire, and a collapse of ecosystems. If cities stood before this moment, they were wiped away, leaving only shards of their existence for us to rediscover. And yet something of them remains in the orientation of ancient temples, in the accuracy of maps drawn long before satellites, in the myths that span oceans and culture. Our task is to piece together these fragments, to walk the thin line between what is accepted and what is possible, to recognize that the greatest cities in human history may not be the ones that rose from the ashes, but the ones we have yet to find beneath them. By the end of this story, you will be faced with a choice: accept the tidy version of history we've been given, or dare to imagine that our species' memory runs deeper, our achievements older, and our beginnings far stranger than we ever thought possible. The shadows beneath the ice are waiting. Let's begin. The past, as told in textbooks, is a clean staircase, step by step, rung by rung. Humanity climbs from the primitive to the advanced, first the hunters and gatherers, then the farmers, then the kings and builders, finally the scientists and engineers of the modern age. In this version of history, the story begins in earnest about 10,000 years ago. Before that, human life is painted in broad, simple strokes: scattered family bands following migrating herds, building nothing more permanent than temporary shelters. Civilization, with its stone cities, written records, laws, and monumental architecture, is supposed to be a late invention, a spark ignited only after the Ice Age melted away. The narrative most people know unfolds like this: around 10,000 BCE, humans, in the Fertile Crescent, begin experimenting with agriculture. By 8,000 BCE, small farming villages appear. By 3,500 BCE, the Sumerians emerge in Mesopotamia, widely considered the cradle of civilization. Within the next 2,000 years, Egypt's pyramids rise, China's dynasties form, and Mesoamerica's first ceremonial centers begin to take shape. It's a tidy story, tidy enough to fit into a single classroom chart, and for decades, it went largely unchallenged. Part of the appeal is its simplicity. If human civilization is a recent development, then the arc of history feels predictable, almost inevitable. We start at zero and move upward, each new century an improvement over the last. In this view, there are no great rises and falls before the Sumerians, no empires buried beneath the sands of deep time. Just an unbroken line from stone tools to smartphones, but like all good stories, this one leaves out inconvenient chapters. Archaeologists and historians built the official timeline around sites they could date and study with confidence. Ruins made of durable stone, artifacts in undisturbed layers of soil, written records that could be deciphered. Anything older than that tended to disappear in the archaeological fog. Wood rotted, metal corroded, settlements were swallowed by rivers, deserts, or oceans. Without physical evidence, there was nothing to place on the chart. Yet this absence of evidence became evidence of absence. Because no cities older than 6,000 years could be found, it was assumed they did not exist. Because no written records survived from before agriculture, it was assumed literacy itself did not exist. The conventional timeline also rests on a powerful assumption that agriculture had to come before cities. Without farming, so the theory goes, people could not feed large populations in one place. Without large populations, there could be no division of labor, no architecture, no culture. This sequence, farming first, civilization later, is treated as a natural law. But even within the mainstream record, cracks begin to appear. Hunter-gatherer societies, like the Natufians in the Levant, built permanent stone structures before agriculture became their primary food source. Monumental architecture appears at Göbekli Tepe centuries, perhaps millennia, before large-scale farming in that region. Coastal settlements in Japan's Jomon period, dating back over 14,000 years, show pottery traditions that imply long-term community life. And then there are the artifacts that don't fit anywhere. A drilled stone bead from South Africa, dated to over 40,000 years ago, showing precision work that would challenge a modern jeweler. A wooden walkway in England's Somerset levels, built nearly 6,000 years before the pyramids. Stone cutting marks in South America that defy the known toolkits of their supposed builders. The official timeline explains these as anomalies, outliers that don't change the overall pattern. But if we collect enough of these anomalies, do they not begin to form a pattern of their own? Here is the contrast at the heart of our journey. On one side, the polished staircase of known history, with each step firmly labeled, on the other a fractured mosaic of discoveries that refuse to sit neatly on any rung. Textbook history is also built on survivorship bias. We know more about Sumer than about any earlier culture, partly because Sumer's records were baked into clay tablets that survived millennia. If an Ice Age city built its records into wood, bark, or cloth, they would have vanished long ago. Our picture of the past is built from what survived, not from everything that once existed. And yet the human capacity for complexity does not suddenly switch on with agriculture. Anatomically modern humans, indistinguishable from us in brain size and structure, have existed for nearly 300,000 years. To suggest they spent 95% of that time without experimenting with permanent architecture or organized society is to assume a kind of intellectual hibernation, an assumption not supported by the ingenuity visible even in Paleolithic art, tools, and symbolic artifacts. Still, the defenders of the official record are not villains. They operate under a fundamental rule of science: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To rewrite history, you must have proof that can survive the scrutiny of dating labs, stratigraphy reports, and peer review. A half-buried wall or a strange artifact is not enough. It must be verified, contextualized, and perhaps most importantly, accepted by the academic gatekeepers. But therein lies another problem. The gatekeepers decide what questions can be asked in the first place. And here is where many in the alternative history community argue that skepticism becomes censorship. If a discovery doesn't fit the timeline, it is often ignored, ridiculed, or quietly shelved until its discoverers stop talking about it. As the credits of history roll past in museum displays, there is little room for the uncredited actor. The possible civilizations that played their part then vanished before the official story even begins. In the chapters ahead, we will walk outside the safety of that staircase. We will explore places that, if the official timeline is correct, should not exist. Stone cities standing thousands of years too early, precision-engineered structures that predate metallurgy, and underwater ruins that suggest coastlines bustling with life before the sea claimed them. Before we do, however, it's important to understand how the official version became so entrenched. It is not just a matter of archaeology, it is a matter of cultural inertia. Once a narrative is accepted, it becomes self-reinforcing. Research grants flow to projects that support it. Students are trained to see through its lens, and museums arrange their exhibits to tell its story. Changing the timeline would require not just new evidence, but a revolution in how we think about human potential, one that could rewrite, not just history books, but our sense of identity. The official timeline of civilization is, in many ways, a comfort. It tells us we are the peak, the culmination of a slow, steady climb. The alternative, that we are one of many rises and falls, that others may have walked these same paths and built wonders now lost, is far less comforting. But it may also be far closer to the truth. As we step into the next section, we will leave the clean staircase of textbook history behind and enter the Ice Age world as it really was, vast, treacherous, and just possibly far more civilized than we have ever been told. Step outside your door, not today, but 15,000 years ago, and you would not recognize the world. The air is sharper, drier, carrying the distant creak and groan of ice sheets taller than skyscrapers. Vast white walls stretch across continents, reflecting sunlight back into a colder sky. In North America, the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets blanket nearly half the landmass. In Northern Europe, a single sheet swallows Scandinavia and the British Isles. The poles are not where the danger lies. It is the mid-latitudes where advancing glaciers reshape entire landscapes. The Earth is locked in the final stages of the Pleistocene Ice Age. Sea levels are over 100 meters lower than they are today. This changes everything. Coastlines extend far out into what is now ocean, revealing broad continental shelves, fertile river valleys, and island chains that no longer exist. The Bering Land Bridge connects Asia and North America, while in Southeast Asia the Sunda Shelf binds Indonesia into a massive landmass, and Sahul unites Australia and New Guinea. The world map is almost unrecognizable, a planet of new continents and vanished seas. According to the standard view, humans in this era survive by following the seasons and the herds. They hunt mammoth, mastodon, bison, giant sloth. They fish rivers, swollen with Ice Age meltwater. They gather nuts, roots, and berries, moving constantly, leaving little behind except stone tools and fire pits. Life, we're told, is precarious. One failed hunt, one harsh winter, can mean the end of an entire group. But survival is only part of the picture. The archaeological record, fragmentary as it is, hints at something more. Some late Pleistocene peoples show evidence of long-term settlement patterns, not permanent cities, as we think of them, but semi-permanent base camps. Sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dated to nearly 30,000 years ago, reveal large communal dwellings, sophisticated art, and even kilns for firing ceramic figurines. This is not the work of people too busy surviving to innovate, and in some regions, the story grows stranger still. Along Ice Age coastlines, now buried underwater, sonar surveys have detected geometric anomalies, straight lines, right angles, and terraces lying hundreds of feet below the surface. These were once dry lands, prime territory for settlement, before the Great Melt began around 12,000 years ago. The late Pleistocene climate is not constant. It swings violently. Periods of relative warmth give way to sudden chills. Around 12,800 years ago, a cataclysmic event, possibly a series of comet impacts or massive meltwater pulses, triggers the Younger Dryas, a 1,000-year return to near-glacial conditions. In the official version of history, this period marks a setback for hunter-gatherers. In the alternative view, it is the end of something far greater. The destruction of complex societies that had adapted to the Ice Age world. Imagine what that world would demand from its people. It is a realm of extremes, and extremes force innovation. Shelter must be more than a pile of hides. It must withstand months of brutal cold. Food must be stored for long winters. Clothing must be engineered for mobility and warmth. Navigation, whether by land or sea, must be precise enough to cross vast, ice-choked distances. The conventional timeline tells us these innovations came slowly and always from necessity, the bare minimum required to survive. But what if in some regions humans went further? What if necessity sparked not just survival technologies, but thriving communities, art, trade, and long-distance exploration? Here lies the contrast that will drive the next steps in our journey. The known history paints the Ice Age as a stage too hostile for cities to rise. The hidden possibility suggests that those very challenges may have forged sophisticated cultures we have yet to rediscover. The geography of the time makes the hidden possibility even more plausible. With lower sea levels, many of the world's most resource-rich areas lay along coasts that are now underwater. These were fertile zones, with rivers meeting the sea, teeming with fish, game, and plant life. Such places would have been magnets for settlement, and inevitably, for the rise of more permanent communities. When the ice melted, these lands drowned, erasing nearly all traces of human occupation. And yet, hints survive. Divers off the coast of India have reported submerged walls and streets near the Gulf of Kampat. Sonar scans near Malta reveal undersea structures resembling temples. In the North Sea, trawlers have dredged up tools and bones from Doggerland, a vast lowland that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. None of these finds are definitive proof of Ice Age cities, but they all point in the same direction. We have been looking for our origins in the wrong places. There's another factor that complicates the harsh, primitive narrative. Ice Age humans were not biologically different from us. They had the same brains, the same capacity for imagination, invention, and social organization. If modern humans were thrown into the Pleistocene with the knowledge we have today, we could build cities. The challenge would be resources and conditions, not mental capacity. The same was true for our ancestors. The question is not whether they could build cities, but whether they did, and whether we can find the remains. The Ice Age world, then, was not a frozen wasteland devoid of complexity. It was a dynamic, shifting stage on which humans adapted, experimented, and possibly achieved levels of social organization far ahead of the accepted timeline. And as the ice sheets retreated, they may have carried those cities and their builders into oblivion. As we leave this section, we stand at a threshold. We've mapped the world as it was, seen how much of it now lies beneath the sea, and felt the fragility of life in the shadow of glaciers. In the next chapter, we dive quite literally into those drowned coastlines, searching for the ruins of places that, according to the official story, could not possibly exist. Picture a world map, not the one you know, but the one from 14,000 years ago. The continents are larger. Coastlines stretch dozens of miles farther into what is now open ocean. Rivers run through broad valleys that today are hidden under hundreds of feet of water. The shallow continental shelves, now teeming with marine life, were once grasslands, forests, and fertile floodplains. This was prime real estate for Ice Age humanity. Food was abundant. Fresh water flowed freely. Climate along these coasts was milder than in the deep interior. If a civilization wanted to thrive, these shorelines were where they would build. But there was one problem. These were also the first places to disappear. As the Ice Age ended, glaciers began to melt. Over the course of just a few thousand years, and at times in catastrophic pulses, sea levels rose by more than 120 meters. Imagine watching your town vanish not over centuries, but within a few human lifetimes. For anyone living in low-lying coastal cities, the ocean didn't just creep in, it roared, swallowing harbors, marketplaces, temples, and homes. Today, those ancient shorelines are nearly invisible, hidden under murky water and layers of silt. Modern archaeology has barely scratched the surface of what lies there, because underwater excavation is expensive, dangerous, and for many researchers considered a gamble with little return. Yet in recent decades, a handful of discoveries have started to hint at what we've been missing. In 2001, a team from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology conducted sonar scans off the coast of Gujarat. They were mapping the seabed when they found something unexpected, geometric patterns stretching for miles, including what appeared to be foundations, streets, and massive rectangular structures. The sonar images suggested a city that could be 9,000 years old or older. Skeptics argued the formations were natural. Supporters pointed to artifacts recovered from dredging, including tools and pottery fragments. Without a full excavation, the truth remains elusive. But if the site is genuine, it would mean an advanced settlement thrived here thousands of years before the Indus Valley civilization. Far to the northwest lies another lost landscape, Doggerland. Between Britain and continental Europe, the modern North Sea hides what was once a lush, habitable plain. Rivers meandered through grasslands, herds of animals migrated across it, human communities hunted, fished, and possibly traded along its shores. Fishing trawlers in the region have pulled up evidence of this vanished world: stone tools, spear points, even human bones. In some cases, these finds are tens of thousands of years old. While no stone cities have been uncovered, the richness of the archaeological material suggests Doggerland was more than a temporary hunting ground. Some researchers believe it may have supported large semi-permanent settlements, the kind that could evolve into true urban centers. On the other side of the world, divers in the 1980s discovered a massive stepped formation off the coast of Unaguni Island in Japan. The monument features flat terraces, sharp corners, and what appear to be stairways and pillars. Some geologists claim these shapes are natural formations caused by fracturing in the rock. Others argue the precision and layout indicate human modification. If Unaguni is man-made, it could date back at least 10,000 years to a time when the area was above water. That would place it in the heart of the Ice Age and force a re-evaluation of what people were capable of building at the time. In the Mediterranean, Malta is famous for its megalithic temples, some of the oldest standing structures on Earth, dated to around 5,600 BCE. But underwater surveys around the islands have found similar formations at depths suggesting they were built before the sea rose. If confirmed, these submerged temples could be thousands of years older than their onshore counterparts, pushing Malta's architectural history deep into the Ice Age. These sites, Kambat Doggerland, Unaguni, Malta, are only the beginning. The truth is that most of the ancient coastlines remain unexplored. Modern technology has given us powerful tools for this work: side-scan sonar sub-bottom profilers, remotely operated vehicles. But even with these tools, politics, funding, and the sheer vastness of the oceans make the task daunting. The official historical narrative tends to treat the sea as a clean slate. Once the waters rose, the past was wiped away. But in reality, the seabed is not empty. It is a vast, unopened archive of human history. Imagine entire port cities frozen in time under layers of sediment, like Pompeii beneath the ash, waiting for someone to bring them into the light. Part of the resistance to investigating these sites comes from the burden of proof. Underwater ruins are difficult to date accurately, and natural formations can mimic man-made structures. Without undeniable evidence, like inscriptions or artifacts in situ, mainstream archaeology is reluctant to embrace radical revisions of the timeline. But the reluctance runs deeper than that. If these submerged sites were proven to be cities from before the Ice Age ended, it would overturn one of the foundational pillars of our understanding, that complex urban societies could not exist before agriculture. It would mean rewriting not just a chapter of history, but the entire first volume. Here is the contrast we face. The known history says coastal cities began appearing only in the last few thousand years, after agriculture and metallurgy made them possible. The hidden possibility suggests that the first great urban centers may now be lying silent beneath the waves, their remains erased from view, but not from existence. The difference between the two is not just academic, it changes how we see ourselves. If we have built great cities before and lost them, then our current age is not the pinnacle of human achievement. It is only the latest crest in a much older and more mysterious cycle. As we surface from these drowned shorelines, we turn inland to a windswept hill in modern-day Turkey. There, atop a barren rise, lies a site that should not exist if the official timeline is correct. It is older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older even than agriculture as we know it. And yet it was built with artistry and skill that rivals any monument in human history. In the next section, we walk among its towering pillars, each one carved with the marks of hands that worked the stone before the Ice Age had fully released its grip. The hill looks ordinary from a distance, a dusty rise on the edge of the Anatolian plateau, swept by wind and sun. To the casual eye, there is nothing remarkable here. Shepherds once grazed their flocks across its slopes. Farmers plowed fields at its base. For millennia, the place was just another hill in southeastern Turkey. But buried beneath its surface lay a structure that would upend the accepted story of human history. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began excavating the site. What he found seemed impossible. From the earth emerged massive limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in great circles. The pillars were not rough utilitarian blocks. They were smooth, deliberately shaped, and carved with intricate reliefs of animals: foxes, snakes, vultures, lions. Some pillars were T-shaped, their flat tops evoking the shoulders of stylized human forms. Others were etched with abstract symbols whose meanings remain unknown. As more of the site was uncovered, the scale became staggering. Dozens of these stone circles were buried across the hill, each one older than any known monumental architecture. Radiocarbon dating placed their construction at around 9,600 BCE, more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge and over 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid. According to the standard model of history, this should not have been possible. Humanity at that time was supposed to be living in small nomadic groups, subsisting by hunting and gathering. Large-scale construction was not just unlikely, it was supposedly impossible. The accepted theory has long been that agriculture was the trigger for civilization. Once people began farming, they could produce surpluses, settle in one place, and organize labor for projects like temples or cities. Göbekli Tepe flips that theory on its head. It appears that people here came together to build monumental structures before agriculture took root. In fact, some archaeologists now suggest that the communal effort of building and maintaining this site may have been the very thing that led to the development of farming, a reversal of the sequence that rewrites the first chapters of civilization. The artistry of the carvings raises even deeper questions. These were not crude attempts by a people taking their first steps toward architecture. The symmetry, the alignment, and the precision of the reliefs suggest an already mature tradition of design and symbolism. The choice of animals is striking too. They are not all local game or livestock, but a mix of predators and prey depicted with a confidence that implies deep cultural or spiritual meaning. Were these images totemic, representing clans or deities? Or were they part of a symbolic language we no longer understand? Then there is the mystery of its burial. At some point thousands of years after its construction, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately covered over with tons of earth and debris. This was not the slow work of nature. It was intentional, fast, and thorough. Why would a culture invest such colossal effort in creating something so magnificent, only to hide it from the world? Was it an act of preservation, a ritual closure, or a desperate attempt to protect it from a coming cataclysm? As Schmidt and his team dug deeper, they realized they had only scratched the surface. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that the excavated areas represented less than 5% of the site. The rest remains underground, sealed away, waiting for the hands and eyes of the present to meet the vision of the past. The context of its age makes Göbekli Tepe even more provocative. Around 9,600 BCE, the same time the site was built, the last ice age had just ended in a period of abrupt warming. Sea levels were rising, landscapes were transforming. In many parts of the world, large animals were going extinct. To create something of this magnitude in such a turbulent era suggests not only organizational skill but also a strong motivation, perhaps to mark a moment of survival, a rebirth after a long struggle against the elements. Mainstream scholars see it as the work of local hunter-gatherer groups pooling their resources. But others point out that the logistics, quarrying and transporting multi-ton stones without wheels, metal tools, or draft animals would require a level of coordination and engineering knowledge that seems far ahead of its time. If this was truly humanity's first temple, it may not have been built from scratch by beginners, but by inheritors of a much older tradition. One that may have originated during the Ice Age itself. There is another layer to the mystery: the site's alignment. Some researchers argue that certain pillars and enclosures may have been positioned in relation to astronomical events, such as the rising of specific stars or the solstices. If true, this would imply an advanced understanding of the sky, one that mainstream history does not credit to people of this era. In ancient cultures, the heavens were often a calendar, a guide for planting, harvesting, and ritual. For a pre-agricultural society to have mastered such alignments would be extraordinary. In the popular imagination, Göbekli Tepe has been called the world's first cathedral. But that label may miss the point. Cathedrals are built within established civilizations. This place may have been something more primal, a nexus where scattered groups converge to reaffirm their shared identity, exchange knowledge, and perhaps pass down stories too important to lose. In this light, Göbekli Tepe becomes not just a building, but a living archive of a culture's worldview frozen in stone. Yet for all its wonder, Göbekli Tepe remains silent on one crucial matter. Where did its builders come from, and where did they go? There are no nearby settlements from the same period that match its sophistication. The people who raised these pillars vanish from the record almost as suddenly as they appeared. Did they disperse into the surrounding lands, taking fragments of their knowledge with them? Or were they already the remnants of a greater, older civilization, gathering here for one last monumental act before fading away? The contrast between the official narrative and what this hill reveals is stark. In the conventional timeline, the arc of history is slow, logical, and incremental. Small camps become villages, villages grow into towns, towns become cities. Göbekli Tepe feels like a leap, a sudden flare of complexity that appears out of nowhere and then disappears again. To accept its implications means accepting that history is not a straight line, but a fractured mosaic, with pieces missing, others buried, and some deliberately concealed. Today visitors walk among the exposed circles, shielded from the elements by protective roofs. They see the same carvings that an ancient hand chiseled 12,000 years ago. They stand between pillars that have endured longer than any empire, any dynasty, any nation, and whether they know it or not, they are standing in the middle of a question that still has no answer. From this hill in Anatolia, the trail of anomalies spreads outward, to other places and other stones that tell a similar story. In the highlands of Peru, in the deserts of Egypt, and on remote islands in the Pacific, we find echoes of the same mystery, structures that defy their supposed time. But before we travel to those distant sites, we must first examine the stones themselves, their shaping, their placement, their endurance. For in the marks left by ancient tools, there may be clues to the hands and the minds that wielded them. When you stand before a megalith, the first thing you feel is weight, not just the physical mass of stone, but the weight of intent. Someone long ago decided that this rock, sometimes the size of a small house, needed to be moved, shaped, and set in a particular place. And they decided this at a time when, according to the textbooks, such feats should have been far beyond their reach. The paradox begins here. The farther back in time you go, the heavier the stones seem to get. At Göbekli Tepe, the limestone pillars rise like sentinels, smooth and balanced despite their bulk. In other corners of the ancient world, the same story unfolds, with even larger dimensions. In Baalbek, Lebanon, a single quarried block, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighs over 1,000 tons. In Sacsayhuaman, Peru, polygonal blocks weighing up to 200 tons fit together with such precision that a knife blade cannot pass between them. These works are scattered across continents, built by cultures that we are told had no contact with each other. Yet their methods and their mysteries rhyme. The official explanations for these feats rely on the tools and techniques known from later eras: ropes, wooden sledges, levers, earthen ramps. But when engineers attempt to replicate such work using only what was supposedly available at the time, the results are often underwhelming. In controlled experiments, moving multi-ton stones, even short distances, is exhausting, slow, and dangerous. Shaping them to precise tolerances with stone hammers and copper chisels is even more difficult, especially when the material is harder than the tools themselves. The question becomes unavoidable. Were these people truly working from scratch, or were they inheriting techniques and perhaps tools from an earlier, more capable tradition? Some archaeologists argue that with enough time, labor, and ingenuity, anything is possible. They point to the simple principle that large groups of motivated workers can accomplish extraordinary things with basic means. But that logic wavers when the timelines get compressed. In many of these cases, the builders were not sedentary farmers with a surplus of labor. They were, according to the conventional view, semi-nomadic or newly settled peoples still mastering the basics of agriculture. Why then would they commit decades, perhaps generations, to projects whose scale far exceeded their immediate needs? The shaping of the stones often holds as much mystery as their movement. In some cases, the surfaces are smooth in ways that suggest more than just hammering and chipping. The basalt blocks at Pumapunku in Bolivia display perfectly straight cuts and right angles, as if machined. The casing stones of the Great Pyramid fit so tightly that their joins are almost invisible. In the case of Göbekli Tepe, the relief carvings are clean and consistent across hard limestone, a task that with primitive tools would demand both patience and remarkable skill. If we look at these works as a form of language, the language of stone patterns begin to emerge. Monumental stonework often marks sacred or astronomically significant sites. The positioning of blocks, the alignment of pillars, the choice of materials, all seem to carry meaning. In many ancient cultures, stone was eternal, the closest thing to immortality available to human hands. To shape stone was to send a message forward in time, across centuries or millennia. The builders may have been less concerned with immediate utility than with communicating something they believed must not be lost. Here, the contrast between the known history and the hidden possibility grows sharp. In the known history, these stones are simply the work of clever, determined people pushing their abilities to the limit. In the hidden possibility, they are the work of descendants or survivors of a civilization that mastered techniques now lost. If that is true, then each block is a fragment of an inheritance, a relic of an age we no longer remember. Transportation remains one of the most baffling aspects. Without wheels, cranes, or iron tools, how were 100-ton stones moved across uneven terrain? Logs as rollers work only on smooth ground. Sledges require lubrication, water, mud, or animal fat. But these methods leave traces in the archaeological record, traces that are often absent. Some researchers suggest that the builders may have known techniques to reduce friction or even temporarily alter the weight of the stones. Such theories veer into the speculative, but the fact remains, the practical mechanics of many of these moves have never been convincingly demonstrated. We are left with another striking pattern. The older the structure, the more precise and massive it tends to be. Later cultures often built atop these ancient foundations, but with smaller stones and less precision. In many places, you can see the transition in a single wall, massive, tightly fitted blocks at the base, and above them, cruder, more haphazard construction from a later period. It is as if the knowledge that once allowed for such feats was partially lost, with descendants left to imitate the works of their ancestors without fully understanding how they were made. The enigma deepens when we consider the durability of these constructions. Many of the oldest stoneworks have survived earthquakes, floods, and centuries of weathering with minimal damage, while younger structures nearby have crumbled to rubble. Some of this can be attributed to sheer mass, but in other cases, the interlocking shapes and angled joins appear to dissipate seismic energy in ways that suggest a sophisticated grasp of engineering principles. In short, these were not just monuments, but resilient structures built to endure. There is also the possibility that we are looking at only a fraction of what once existed. Stone endures, but other materials do not. If the builders had knowledge of wood, metal, or composite materials, those artifacts may have decayed or been scavenged long ago. What remains are the silent witnesses, the stones that could not be destroyed. The story they tell is incomplete, but it hints at a greater whole. From Göbekli Tepe's carved limestone to the granite monoliths of Egypt and the andesite blocks of the Andes, the stones share a common characteristic. They were meant to last beyond the lives of their maker. They are not random, they are deliberate. Whether serving as temples, calendars, fortresses, or something else entirely, they were constructed with the expectation that someone, someday, would stand before them and wonder. And so here we are, doing exactly that. We try to read the language of stone without a dictionary, piecing together meaning from the shapes, the alignments, the scars of tools long gone. The question is not just how these works were built, but why, and by whom. Were they the first flickers of civilization, or the final embers of one that had already burned brightly before the Ice Age ended? The next part of our journey takes us westward, and far deeper into time, to a land where a river once nurtured one of the most enduring civilizations on Earth. But the story we've been told about Egypt, like so many others, may be incomplete. Beneath the sands and in the stones of the Nile Valley, there are hints of a past that stretches far beyond the dynasties and pharaohs, back to an age when the builders may have been working from an inheritance far older than anyone now remembers. Egypt's story is usually told as a straight line, from scattered prehistoric communities along the Nile to the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE and onward through the reigns of the pharaohs. It's a narrative neatly bound between the invention of writing and the arrival of outside conquerors. But what if the line isn't straight at all? What if, instead of beginning at the birth of dynastic Egypt, the story loops backward into a time we barely acknowledge, an Egypt that already stood upon the shoulders of an older world? The Nile Valley has been inhabited for tens of thousands of years, but mainstream archaeology insists that monumental construction began only after agriculture and centralized authority emerged. Yet scattered clues suggest that some of Egypt's most iconic structures may have deeper origins. The Great Sphinx, for example, has long been attributed to Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE, but its weathering patterns, deep vertical fissures along its flanks, don't match wind erosion typical of a desert environment. They look instead like the result of prolonged heavy rainfall. Egyptologists dismiss this as coincidence, but geologists like Robert Schoch argue it points to a time when the region experienced a much wetter climate, potentially before 7000 BCE or even earlier. If the Sphinx is older than the civilization we credit with building it, then the implications ripple across all of Egyptology. The same question arises for the so-called Valley Temple near the Sphinx, built of massive limestone blocks that dwarf those used in later pyramid construction. These stones are weathered in the same way as the Sphinx's body, suggesting a shared origin or at least a shared exposure to the rains of a climate long gone. The Great Pyramid itself is officially dated to Khufu's reign, its 2-3 million stone blocks laid over a period of about 20 years. But certain details refuse to fit neatly into this time frame. The precision of the casing stones, the near-perfect alignment to true north, and the uniformity of the construction suggest not just skill, but a mastery of surveying and engineering that would remain unmatched for millennia. If Khufu's builders inherited foundational techniques from an earlier tradition, the pyramid's remarkable qualities begin to make more sense. Beneath Egypt's sand lies another mystery: the absence of intermediate stages in building technology. In most civilizations, monumental architecture develops gradually, from small-scale stonework to more ambitious projects. In Egypt, the leap from modest pre-dynastic structures to the scale and precision of the Old Kingdom's works is abrupt. It's as if a fully formed toolkit of engineering knowledge appeared overnight. This mirrors what we've seen elsewhere. Massive, technically advanced stonework often appears suddenly, with no clear developmental path. Even more intriguing are the traces of megalithic construction in less celebrated locations. At Abydos, the Osirion sits sunken into the earth, its granite blocks weighing over 100 tons each, far larger than those in surrounding temples. Officially, the Osirion is attributed to Seti I, who reigned in the 13th century BCE, but its stark, unadorned megalithic style doesn't match the ornate hieroglyph-covered architecture of his era. Many suspect it is far older, a relic incorporated into later works. The question of why hangs heavy here. Why would a supposedly nascent civilization begin by building at such a massive scale, only to gradually reduce its ambitions? If we follow the conventional story, it makes little sense. But if we see Old Kingdom Egypt as inheriting, and perhaps only partially understanding, techniques from a much earlier source, then the arc becomes clear. Their earliest works were their most sophisticated because they were working from a template they did not originate. The Nile itself offers a clue. Civilizations form around rivers, but the Nile's cycles have shifted dramatically over time. During the African humid period, roughly 10,000 to 6,000 years ago, the region was lush with rainfall, feeding a swelling river and supporting a very different way of life. Settlements would have clustered along the banks, perhaps forming networks of trade and culture that have left little trace beneath the silt. If a high culture arose during this green Sahara phase, much of its material record could have been erased when the desert returned. The known Egypt is the Egypt of the desert, stone monuments against a backdrop of arid sky. The hidden Egypt may be the Egypt of water, a place where stone was shaped in a world alive with vegetation, fish-rich waters and fertile banks. This context could explain both the scale and the permanence of the earliest stoneworks. They were not desperate works of survival in a harsh climate, but confident statements in a time of abundance. Of course, to challenge Egypt's accepted timeline is to invite resistance. Egyptology is a discipline with deep roots and powerful traditions, and shifting the foundation of its chronology is like asking a cathedral to rebuild its cornerstone. But the stones themselves do not care about academic consensus. They stand as they always have, bearing the marks of an age that may predate our current story by thousands of years. If we entertain the idea that Egypt's oldest works are survivals from an earlier world, then Egypt is no longer the cradle of civilization, it is the caretaker of civilization's last testament. The Great Pyramids and temples may not be the first chapter, but the epilogue of a story that began before the Ice Age's final retreat. The Nile Valley, with its rich floodplains and enduring stone, was the perfect place to preserve such legacies, even if their meaning was later adapted to serve new rulers and gods. And so, Egypt becomes a bridge in our narrative. On one side lies the accepted historical record, with its pharaohs, dynasties, and tombs. On the other lies a shadowy prehistory, where builders worked on a scale and with a precision that seems to come from nowhere. The line between them is blurred by sand and time, but the more we look, the more that line begins to fade. From here, our path leads southward and deeper into the African continent, to a place far less publicized in the annals of ancient engineering, yet equally potent in its ability to unsettle our sense of history. Beneath the soils of Great Zimbabwe, and in the stone circles of West Africa lie traces of a chapter that mainstream timelines barely mention. And as we shall see, the continent's forgotten monuments carry the same echoes we've already heard in the stones of Anatolia, the Andes, and the Nile, the echoes of a people who built cities before the Ice Age ended. The story of ancient Africa is often framed as beginning with Egypt, then leaping forward thousands of years to medieval kingdoms like Mali or Great Zimbabwe. The centuries in between are treated as a vast silence, as though the continent beyond the Nile Valley lay dormant, waiting for history to find it. But the stones tell a different story. Far to the south, in the rolling highlands of modern-day Zimbabwe, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe rise from the earth like the rib cage of a sleeping giant. Massive walls of granite blocks twist and curve in elegant arcs, enclosing spaces the size of small towns. These walls were built without mortar, each stone carefully shaped to lock into the next, the joints so tight that grass and rain have failed to pull them apart, even after centuries. Archaeologists date the site to between the 11th and 15th centuries CE, a medieval trading center, they say, connected to the Indian Ocean trade routes. But Great Zimbabwe's sophistication, its scale, its layout, its precise alignment with local landmarks, raises the question of whether it represents a culmination or a remnant. Could it be part of a deeper, older tradition of stone building in Africa, one whose roots stretch far beyond the medieval period? Across the continent, scattered sites suggest this is not an isolated case. In West Africa, thousands of stone circles stand in Senegal and the Gambia, their reddish pillars rising from the savanna in silent clusters. Officially, they are attributed to local cultures between 300 BCE and 1600 CE, but little is known about the people who built them or why they undertook such a monumental effort. Their purpose is unclear: burial markers, ceremonial sites, astronomical observatories, or perhaps all of these. Even further south, in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa, the sprawling stone arrangement known as Adam's Calendar lies half buried in grass. Local researchers claim it may be over 25,000 years old, though mainstream archaeology regards this as unlikely, preferring a far more recent origin. Still, its stones are aligned with solstices and cardinal points, and its weathered surfaces suggest a considerable antiquity. If the higher age estimates are even partially correct, then Adam's calendar would predate every known civilization, aligning it with the very time period we are investigating. The last ice age. The difficulty in piecing together Africa's deeper architectural past lies in the scarcity of material evidence. Much of the continent's early architecture may have been made of wood, clay, or other perishable materials. Stone, where it was used, survives, but without inscriptions or artifacts, dating becomes uncertain. And in the absence of written records, oral histories take center stage. Yet these are often dismissed by academia as unreliable, even when they contain strikingly consistent motifs. Stories of ancient builders, of vanished cities, of floods that remade the land. The Lemba people of southern Africa, for example, carry oral traditions of being descended from ancient builders and traders with skills in metallurgy and stonework. Genetic studies have revealed traces of Middle Eastern ancestry among them, suggesting long-forgotten connections between African interior cultures and distant civilizations. Whether these links are direct evidence of Ice Age-era migrations or simply part of later trade networks, they hint at a level of connectivity and cultural exchange rarely acknowledged in conventional African prehistory. Then there is the enigma of the Sahara. Today, it is the largest hot desert in the world, a place of wind-carved rock and shifting dunes. But during the African humid period, between about 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, it was a vast green expanse of lakes, rivers, and grasslands. Archaeologists have found evidence of settlements, rock art, and even monumental structures buried beneath the sands. Some of these petroglyphs depict giraffes, crocodiles, and cattle, a vibrant landscape teeming with life. In this wetter Sahara, stone structures could have risen and thrived, only to be swallowed when the climate shifted. Satellite imagery has revealed tantalizing hints: rectilinear outlines beneath dunes, unusual circular formations in remote regions, and possible remnants of ancient river networks. While these findings remain speculative without excavation, they suggest the Sahara itself may hold the key to a lost chapter in Africa's story, one where monumental stonework was not confined to Egypt, but spread across a green, fertile land that no longer exists. The idea that Africa's megalithic heritage could predate known civilizations challenges a deeply ingrained narrative, one that frames the continent's early history almost exclusively in terms of tribal societies and isolated cultures. If we consider the possibility of a continent-spanning tradition of monumental building during the late Ice Age, then Africa emerges not as a peripheral stage, but as a central arena in humanity's architectural dawn. The reluctance to embrace this idea isn't purely about evidence, it's about implications. Acknowledging that Africa may have hosted advanced construction before the accepted dawn of civilization forces a rethinking of how and where human complexity arose. It suggests that the roots of city building were not confined to Mesopotamia or the Nile, but grew simultaneously in multiple regions, possibly from a shared inheritance of knowledge that survived the Ice Age's end. And just as in Egypt we see the same pattern, the oldest structures, or those suspected to be oldest, often display the largest scale and highest precision. Over time, these qualities diminish, replaced by smaller, more modest works. This reversal of expected progress hints at a break in cultural continuity, a loss of knowledge, followed by partial rediscovery. From the great stone walls of Zimbabwe to the silent circles of the Gambia, from the weathered alignments of Adam's calendar to the buried shapes beneath the Sahara, the message is the same. Africa's stone legacy is older, richer, and stranger than we've been taught. It stands as both a monument and a question mark, pointing us toward a past that was erased, not by conquest or neglect, but by the relentless hand of time and climate. As we leave Africa in our journey, we carry with us the pattern that is becoming increasingly clear. Wherever we look, the earliest known stoneworks often feel like the echoes of something older. This pattern will follow us as we cross the oceans toward the islands and submerged landscapes that might hold the most dramatic evidence of all, cities swallowed whole when the Ice Age seas began to rise. The sea holds the greatest archive of lost human history and the least explored. We've mapped the surfaces of Mars and the Moon more thoroughly than our own ocean floors. Yet, when we do peer into those depths, we sometimes glimpse something that shouldn't be there. A clean-cut stairway, a perfect right angle, a line of stones marching into the abyss. During the last Ice Age, vast tracts of land now drowned under hundreds of feet of water were dry and habitable. The continental shelves, broad, flat extensions of the continents, were exposed, creating fertile plains, long river valleys, and vast coastal zones that would have been prime real estate for early settlements. If cities existed in that period, this is where they would have thrived, and where they now sleep beneath the waves. One of the most famous and most controversial of these suspected sites lies off the southern coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver, this colossal stone formation sits about 25 meters below the surface. Its features are striking tiered platforms, flat terraces, clean vertical walls, and what appears to be a broad staircase rising from the sea floor. Some researchers argue these are natural formations sculpted by the unique geology of the region. Others, including marine geologist Masaaki Kimura, contend that the regularity of the shapes, the apparent carvings, and the alignment with ancient shorelines point to human modification. If Kimura is correct, Yonaguni could date back at least 10,000 years, placing it in the late Ice Age when sea levels were dramatically lower. That would make it older than any known city, and potentially a surviving fragment of a coastal civilization erased when the seas rose. Half a world away, in the Gulf of Kambat off India's western coast, sonar scans in 2001 revealed a series of geometric patterns beneath 36 meters of water. Subsequent dives retrieved artifacts including stone tools and what appeared to be a fragment of wood radiocarbon dated to nearly 9,500 years ago. This was explosive if the dating was accurate. It would place the site thousands of years before the Indus Valley civilization, rewriting South Asian prehistory. The Indian government initially trumpeted the find, but debate quickly turned fierce, with skeptics questioning the context of the artifacts and the interpretation of the sonar images. Yet, the Gulf of Kambat is hardly an anomaly. Off the coast of Cuba in 2001, Canadian researchers using sonar detected what appeared to be massive stone structures, 600 meters beneath the surface, far too deep to have been exposed during known periods of low sea level, unless the region experienced dramatic geological shifts. The sonar imagery suggested pyramids, roads, and massive blocks. The story briefly caught global attention, then faded unresolved into the background noise of archaeological controversy. What ties these sites together is not only their location underwater, but the way their stories are received. In each case, the possibility of Ice Age-era urban centers challenges the entrenched timeline of civilization's rise. And so, instead of becoming the focus of a coordinated research effort, they linger on the margins, intriguing enough to inspire divers, troubling enough to be quietly ignored by institutions that prefer the comfort of known history. Geologically, the case for submerged cities is compelling. Between roughly 20,000 and 6,000 years ago, as the Ice Age ended, sea levels rose by over 120 meters. This was not a gentle encroachment. There were pulses of rapid meltwater release, sometimes as much as several meters in a single century, that would have swallowed coastlines and drowned settlements before their inhabitants could adapt. The archaeological record on land is already patchy for this era. Underwater, it's all but erased, except for the rare stonework strong enough to resist the currents. And yet, stone remembered. Divers off Malta have documented massive blocks and possible harbor structures beneath the Mediterranean. In the North Sea, sonar surveys have mapped Doggerland, a vast, now submerged landscape that once connected Britain to continental Europe, complete with river valleys, hills, and likely human habitation. Off the coasts of Florida and the Bahamas, unusual stone formations, sometimes called Bimini Roads, stir similar debates about natural versus artificial origins. If we step back, the pattern is striking. These sites often appear on the ancient shorelines of the late Ice Age, the very edges of the world, where a coastal civilization would have thrived. Their dates, when measurable, cluster suspiciously close to the meltwater pulses that sent seas surging. And their forms, whether terraces, blocks, or roads, often show geometric regularity that nature rarely produces on such a scale. What would life in these drowned cities have looked like? Imagine broad river deltas, rich with fish and fertile soil. Imagine trade routes stretching along the coastlines, linking communities with boats capable of crossing open water. Markets under palm shade, temples on cliff edges overlooking the sea. Then, imagine the horizon itself changing, the water creeping closer year after year, until one season a storm comes and does not recede. Imagine the panic, the abandonment, the scattering inland. The survivors would carry their stories with them, to higher ground, to river valleys safe from the advancing tide, and in time, those stories of cities swallowed by the ocean would become myths, flood legends, warnings. It's here that the parallels become impossible to ignore. From the flood of Gilgamesh to the drowning of Atlantis in Plato's dialogues, from the Hindu tale of Manu, saved from the great waters, to the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of lost coastlines, cultures around the world preserve memories of a sea that came to take the land. Modern science tells us these floods happened gradually over millennia. The myths tell us they came like thieves in the night. Perhaps both are true: slow change, punctuated by sudden catastrophe. The ocean does not give up its secrets easily. Excavating on land is difficult enough. Doing so underwater requires specialized equipment, teams of divers, and vast funding. And so, these ruins remain in the realm of tantalizing glimpses, enough to provoke the imagination, too little to satisfy it. Yet, the evidence grows. Each year, advances in sonar mapping and remote-operated vehicle technology make it easier to explore the deep. Each survey of a continental shelf brings the possibility of stumbling upon the next Yonaguni, the next Kampot. The question is not whether such sites exist, the geological conditions make them almost inevitable, but whether we will have the will to find them before time and tide wear them away completely. In the drowned world of the Ice Age coastlines lies a different map of humanity, one that may show our species as builders and navigators long before the first recognized civilizations. To explore these ruins is to look directly into the gap in our history, the missing chapter that connects the scattered evidence on land to a potentially global culture erased by water. And as we leave the ocean floor for now, the pattern becomes harder to deny. megaliths in Africa, temples in the Levant, monuments in Anatolia, and now stonework beneath the sea, all pointing to the same period, all whispering the same possibility. The next step takes us to a place where that possibility rises from the depths into living memory, where legends of a sunken land are not just myth, but part of the cultural identity of entire nations. The trail now leads into the heart of Southeast Asia, to a drowned shelf the size of a continent, and to the people who still remember the world before it disappeared. There is a landmass the size of India that no longer exists. It is not a myth. You can see its shape on bathymetric maps stretching from the Malay Peninsula across to Borneo, down to Java, and out toward the Philippines. Today it lies beneath the shallow seas of the South China Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, and the Java Sea. But during the Ice Age, when sea levels were more than 100 meters lower, it was a vast, continuous expanse of forests, rivers, and fertile plains. Scientists call it Sunda. To those who may have lived there, it was home. The Sunda Shelf was not a barren wasteland. It was a biological paradise. Rivers twice the size of the Mekong braided across the landscape, feeding lush lowlands and teeming deltas. Herds of elephants and rhinoceros roamed its grasslands, while human communities, hunter-gatherers, fishers, and perhaps farmers, moved along its waterways. The coastline would have been a thread of bustling settlements, trading goods, stories, and innovations. For tens of thousands of years, this was one of the most densely habitable areas on Earth. Then the waters began to rise, slowly at first, creeping inland, cutting off peninsulas and creating chains of islands. Then, during the catastrophic meltwater pulses around 14,600 and 8,200 years ago, the pace quickened. Entire river valleys vanished in a matter of decades. Hills became islands. Plains became shallow seas. The heart of Sunda, its richest, flattest lands, disappeared beneath the waves forever. The people fled inland, but they did not forget. In the oral traditions of Austronesian cultures, there are persistent stories of a drowned homeland, a place of abundance swallowed by the ocean, from which their ancestors journeyed to new shores. In some versions, it was lost due to human folly. In others, it was simply the way of the world. These are not the kinds of stories that sprout from nowhere. They are memories passed down across generations, so long that the events they describe now live in the twilight between history and myth. Modern archaeology has only begun to investigate Sunda's drowned landscapes. With much of the shelf under 50 meters of water, it is theoretically one of the easiest submerged regions to explore. Yet, political boundaries, murky waters, and the sheer size of the area have slowed progress. Still, tantalizing discoveries emerge. Off the coast of Singapore, divers have found stone tools and hearth remains dated to more than 7,000 years ago, already after much of the flooding had occurred. In the Natuna Islands, fishermen report pulling up carved stone fragments in their nets. What we can't yet see may be even more compelling. During the Ice Age, the shelf would have supported river systems comparable in size to the Nile or Mississippi. Such rivers almost inevitably nurture human settlements. Along their banks, we might find early farming communities or even complex urban centers, perhaps the true precursors to the monumental cultures that later appeared in Java, Sumatra, and the Philippines. If such cities did exist, the rising seas would have erased them not gradually, but in great terrifying leaps. Geologists studying Sunda's flood history believe that in some places the shoreline could have moved inland by several kilometers in a single human lifetime. Imagine watching the horizon shift year by year, the sea taking land that had been your family's for generations. That kind of trauma doesn't just disappear, it becomes the stuff of legends, of migration epics, of warnings carved into cultural memory. Interestingly, these memories might not be confined to Southeast Asia. Some researchers have drawn connections between the Austronesian migration, which carried people from this region all the way to Madagascar in the west and Easter Island in the east, and the loss of Sunda. They suggest that the flooding may have acted as a cultural and demographic push, scattering maritime peoples outward across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. If so, the legacy of Sunda isn't just a drowned landscape, it's the seed of one of humanity's greatest voyages. What's remarkable is how the Sunda story mirrors other submerged worlds: Doggerland in Europe, the Gulf of Khambat in India, the continental shelves of the Americas. In each case, fertile Ice Age lowlands vanished beneath post-glacial seas, taking with them the record of human activity in some of the most desirable real estate on the planet. In Sunda, the scale is simply bigger, and so is the potential for lost history. The mainstream archaeological model tells us that Southeast Asia's earliest cities appeared only in the last few thousand years, with the rise of states like Funan and Srivijaya. The drowned world of Sunda asks a dangerous question: what if there was an earlier chapter? What if those maritime kingdoms were inheriting, not inventing, the seafaring, trade, and building traditions of a civilization whose heart now lies beneath the Java Sea? Some scholars dismiss the idea, pointing out the lack of definitive archaeological proof. They argue that hunter-gatherers occupied the region, but not urban cultures. Yet, the problem is circular. The evidence that could confirm or refute such claims is underwater, and underwater archaeology is still in its infancy in this part of the world. The truth could be lying in plain sight beneath a thin layer of silt, waiting for the first systematic survey to uncover it. And there are signs of complexity in the deep past here. Cave sites on the nearby mainland, like Naya Cave in Borneo and Taban Cave in the Philippines, have yielded evidence of advanced tool use, burial practices, and long-distance trade far earlier than expected. These are inland sites, preserved by chance. If communities on the coast were even more advanced, their remains would be on the now drowned shelf. Satellite and sonar mapping projects are beginning to outline the ancient river systems of Sunda, giving archaeologists a roadmap for where to look. The day may come when a diver drops into the green waters off Sumatra or Borneo and finds a stone quay, a row of foundations, or a temple plinth still standing in the gloom. When that day comes, we may finally be forced to rewrite not just Southeast Asia's history, but the global story of civilization's dawn. For now, Sunda remains a ghost continent, half known, half imagined, its true nature hidden by a shallow sea. But its shape on the map is undeniable, its fate inevitable, and its echoes in culture unmistakable. And if the waters that buried it could also erase its memory, they have failed, because the people of this region still speak of it, still sing of it, still weave its loss into the heart of who they are. From the tropical shallows of Sunda, our trail now arcs northward to the edges of the Pacific Rim, where legends of sunken lands grow even stranger, and where archaeology meets one of the most famous lost world stories in history. It is here, in the cold North Atlantic of the mind, that we encounter a name whispered for over 2,000 years, Atlantis. But before Plato's myth became a staple of pop culture, it may have been something else entirely, a garbled memory of the very real cities that stood before the ice melted and the seas rose. Atlantis, few names in the lexicon of lost civilizations carry such weight. It conjures images of marble temples, gleaming harbors, and a society so advanced it seemed to belong to another world entirely. For most people, Atlantis lives in the realm of fantasy, a story spun by the philosopher Plato nearly 2,400 years ago. Yet, what if this myth is less invention than distorted memory? What if the real Atlantis, or something like it, stood during the last ice age before rising seas erased it from the map? Plato's account is deceptively simple. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, he describes a powerful island nation beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar. This society, blessed with fertile lands and vast resources, became militarily ambitious, challenging the known world. After a failed invasion of Athens, the island was struck by catastrophic earthquakes and floods, sinking in a single day and night beneath the sea. Historians have long debated what Plato was doing here. Many insist it was pure allegory, a political warning about hubris and moral decay. Others suggest it might have been inspired by real events, the eruption of Thera, the destruction of Minoan Crete, or even older Bronze Age catastrophes. But none of these explanations account for Plato's insistence that the story came from Egyptian priests who claimed it described events 9,000 years before Solon, placing the disaster in the late Ice Age around 11,600 years ago. That date is more than a curious coincidence. It corresponds almost exactly with a known climatic event, the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden warming that triggered massive glacial meltwater pulses. Sea levels rose dramatically, shorelines shifted across the globe, coastal landscapes were redrawn in a geological blink. If there had been an advanced maritime society then, its cities might have stood on the low, fertile plains that were prime real estate, plains now underwater. The Atlantic itself was different in that era. The sea level was over 100 meters lower, exposing vast tracts of continental shelf. Areas now submerged, the Azores Plateau, the Bahamas Banks, the Grand Banks off Newfoundland, would have been large islands or archipelagos, ideal stepping stones for seafaring cultures. If one such island hosted a thriving civilization, its disappearance could have inspired legends that traveled with migrating peoples, eventually reaching Plato's sources. Some researchers point to the Azores as a possible candidate. Today they are isolated volcanic peaks in the mid-Atlantic, but during the Ice Age they would have been much larger. Recent geological surveys have found submerged terraces and structures that some claim resemble harbors. Mainstream science remains cautious, noting that volcanic activity could account for the formations. Still, the fact that the Azores sit almost exactly where Plato's description would place Atlantis, beyond the pillars but close enough to interact with the Mediterranean, keeps them in the conversation. Others look westward to the Bahamas. Here, on the shallow Bahama banks, divers have found the so-called Bimini Road, a formation of large rectangular limestone blocks lying in a straight line. While geologists generally consider it a natural beach rock formation, some divers insist it shows signs of shaping. If an Ice Age city once stood on the now submerged banks, its ruins would lie in less than 30 meters of water, waiting for careful mapping. The more speculative theories even extend to the Caribbean and beyond, suggesting that Atlantis might not have been a single city at all, but a network of maritime cultures spanning the Atlantic's edges, a prehistoric trade confederation linking Europe, Africa, and the Americas. In that model, Plato's island is symbolic of a wider civilization, and its sinking represents the collective drowning of their coastal settlements as the Ice Age ended. What makes Atlantis so compelling is not just the story itself, but how it resonates with flood myths from around the world. Nearly every culture has them. The Greeks had Deucalion, the Mesopotamians had Utnapishtim, the Hindus had Manu, the Maya had their own deluge tales. Many of these myths share striking details: a proud or advanced people, a great flood, survivors fleeing to high ground. In the context of post-glacial sea level rise, such stories may be less metaphor and more folk memory, the human way of keeping a record without writing. The archaeological hurdle, as always, is the ocean. If Atlantis was real and sank beneath the sea over 10,000 years ago, then its remains are on continental shelves, now buried under layers of sediment. Marine archaeology is expensive, slow, and still limited in scope. We've mapped less than 20% of the world's seafloor in high detail, and much of that is deep ocean rather than the shallow shelves where ancient cities would lie. But technology is closing the gap. Autonomous underwater vehicles (AUVs), side-scan sonar, and sub-bottom profilers can now reveal buried structures without excavation. In recent years, surveys off Spain, Morocco, and the Caribbean have revealed possible man-made formations, rectangular patterns, circular mounds, and linear features that await confirmation. None are conclusive yet, but each discovery adds to the sense that something might indeed be out there. For skeptics, Atlantis remains a cautionary tale about reading too much into myth. For believers, it is an unfinished puzzle, with pieces scattered in underwater trenches, coral reefs, and ancient texts. Between these poles lies a growing body of researchers who argue that whether or not Atlantis existed exactly as Plato described, the Ice Age world almost certainly hosted coastal societies of surprising complexity, and their sudden disappearance could have given rise to stories like his. The possibility forces us to reframe history. If there was an Atlantis, whether in the Azores, the Bahamas, or elsewhere, it would mean that organized seafaring civilizations existed millennia before the Sumerians, Egyptians, or Indus Valley cultures rose on land. It would push the roots of urban life into a time when mammoths still walked the earth. And it would make the end of the Ice Age not just a geological event, but one of the greatest cultural extinctions in human history. From here, our journey moves east again, away from the open Atlantic and into the Indian Ocean, a region equally rich in drowned landscapes and legends. Off the coasts of India, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives lie tales of sunken cities, entire kingdoms swallowed by the sea. Some of these have already been glimpsed by divers and sonar teams. Others remain rumors passed down in temple songs and epic poems. If Atlantis has dominated the Western imagination, these Indian Ocean sites may prove to be its Eastern counterparts, no less grand, no less mysterious, and perhaps no less real. The Indian Ocean has its own Atlantean legends, stories of ancient kingdoms that thrived in ages so remote they brushed the boundaries of myth. Here the waters are warm and turquoise, yet beneath them lie the shadows of forgotten cities. For millennia, fishermen have spoken of stone walls glimpsed through clear shallows, of temples that rise from the seabed during the lowest tides, and of bells that can be heard ringing beneath the waves. As in the West, these stories straddle the line between folklore and history, and as in the West, the end of the last ice age provides an uncanny backdrop against which these legends suddenly feel less like fantasy and more like memory. One of the most famous of these tales belongs to Dwarka, an ancient city said to have been founded by the Hindu god Krishna himself. In the Sanskrit epic Mahabharata, Dwarka is described as a glorious city of gold and jewels, built on the western coast of India. Its streets were broad, its gates guarded by towering fortifications, and its harbors filled with ships. But the epic also describes its end after Krishna's departure from the mortal world. The sea rose and swallowed Dwarka whole. For centuries, scholars assumed this was pure mythology. Then, in the early 2000s, a team from the National Institute of Oceanography, NEO, began surveying the Gulf of Khambhat off the coast of Gujarat. Using side-scan sonar, they detected geometric structures on the seabed, grids of what appeared to be streets, massive walls, and rectangular foundations. Samples brought to the surface included pottery shards and even carbonized wood, which returned dates as old as 9,000 years. If those dates are accurate, it would place this version of Dwarka in the late Ice Age, thousands of years before the earliest known cities in the Indus Valley. The mainstream reaction was cautious, even skeptical. The currents in the Gulf of Khambhat are among the strongest in the world, making excavation nearly impossible and the context of the finds difficult to verify. Some argue the structures could be natural formations shaped by tidal flows. But to others the discovery fits too perfectly with the ancient account to dismiss. In the interplay of myth and geology, Dwarka begins to look like a memory of a real Ice Age port, drowned when sea levels rose over 100 meters between 12,000 and 7,000 years ago. The Indian Ocean's most expansive legend, however, belongs to the Tamil tradition, Kumari Kandam. This lost land is said to have been a vast continent stretching south from India into what is now the Indian Ocean, home to the earliest Tamil civilization. Ancient Tamil literature describes it as the cradle of Tamil culture, with advanced cities, monumental architecture, and great academies of learning. It was, according to legend, swallowed by the sea in a series of cataclysms. Kumari Kandam's story is often linked to the concept of Lemuria, a hypothetical landmass proposed by 19th century geologists to explain similarities in flora and fauna between India, Madagascar, and Africa. Lemuria was later discredited as plate tectonics provided better explanations, but in Tamil Nadu, the idea fused with ancient poetry and oral traditions, reinforcing the belief in a sunken homeland. From a scientific perspective, the Indian Ocean during the Ice Age was a very different place. Lower sea levels revealed vast stretches of land now hidden beneath the waves. The Sunda Shelf, connecting much of Southeast Asia, the shallow banks around the Maldives, and coastal plains off Sri Lanka and southern India. Archaeologists have found submerged ruins off Mahabalipuram, where local fishermen long claimed to see 7 temples under the sea. After the 2004 tsunami temporarily exposed some of these structures, divers confirmed the presence of ancient walls and sculptures lying in shallow waters, suggesting a temple complex built before the shoreline retreated. Sri Lanka adds another layer to the story. Off the coast of Mannar, sonar surveys have revealed unusual rectangular formations aligned with what would have been the Ice Age coastline. Some researchers speculate these could be the remains of settlements from a time when Sri Lanka was connected to the Indian mainland by a broad land bridge, a feature that is now just a thin chain of islands and sandbanks known as Adam's Bridge or Ram Setu in Hindu tradition. The bridge itself is central to the Ramayana, which tells of its construction by Rama's army to reach the island kingdom of Lanka. Whether natural or human-modified, it sits in shallow waters that would have been dry land 12,000 years ago. The Indian Ocean's submerged landscapes are a natural byproduct of Ice Age geography. Like the North Sea's Doggerland or Southeast Asia's Sunda Shelf, these coastal plains would have been prime territory for early human settlement. The fact that they now lie underwater means they are among the least explored archaeological regions on Earth. As marine technology improves, scanning and mapping these areas will likely reveal more, perhaps confirming that the grand cities described in epic poetry were rooted in real places now lost beneath the waves. The cultural significance of these legends is profound. Dwarka is not merely a historical puzzle, it is a living site of pilgrimage, with a modern city that shares its name standing just inland from where the ruins are said to lie. Kumari Kandam is not just a story of a lost land, it is bound up in questions of cultural identity, heritage, and the deep antiquity of the Tamil language. When such myths are investigated through the lens of post-Ice Age flooding, they gain a new dimension, not just as symbols but as potential records of human endurance in the face of planetary change. In contrasting the official archaeological narrative with these legends, a familiar tension emerges. Mainstream history prefers to place urbanization in the last 6,000 years, arising independently in river valleys like the Tigris-Euphrates, the Nile, and the Indus. But the Indian Ocean stories suggest a longer, more complex arc, one in which sophisticated coastal cultures may have thrived, trading, building, and storytelling long before the world we know began. Their destruction would have been slow and inevitable, generation after generation, watching the sea creep inland, temples and marketplaces falling to the surf, until only stories remained. What unites these Indian Ocean myths with the tale of Atlantis is not just their content, but their timing. Again and again, the proposed dates of destruction hover around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, exactly when the Ice Age ended. That alignment, repeated across cultures separated by continents, invites us to consider whether human memory is far deeper than we think, and whether oral tradition has preserved the echoes of a prehistoric world erased by rising seas. From here, our investigation turns to yet another ocean basin with its own stories of drowned lands, the Southeast Asian Sunda Shelf, and the mysterious Sundaland hypothesis. Here, the submerged lands are vast, a subcontinent's worth of plains and river valleys that could have supported millions. In these shallow waters, legends of lost kingdoms like Mu and the advanced maritime cultures of early Austronesian peoples may find their geological foundation. If the Atlantic has Atlantis and the Indian Ocean has Kumari Kandam, then Southeast Asia's drowned landscapes are the domain of Sundaland, a sunken subcontinent so vast that its disappearance may be one of the greatest geological events to shape human history. During the last ice age, when sea levels were over 100 meters lower, the shallow seas that today separate Malaysia, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the Philippines were dry land. Rivers the size of the Mississippi carved through immense floodplains. Fertile valleys stretched for hundreds of kilometers, feeding human settlements that had access to rich forests, abundant wildlife, and some of the most productive fishing grounds on Earth. Today, this vanished heartland lies beneath the South China Sea, the Java Sea, and the Gulf of Thailand. But for tens of thousands of years, Sundaland would have been one of the most hospitable regions on the planet, a tropical Eden connected by rivers and coastlines instead of being scattered across islands. The disappearance of such a landmass would have been slow, relentless, and traumatic. As the glaciers melted, the sea rose meter by meter, century after century, cutting communities off from one another and pushing them inland, or forcing them to adapt to new shorelines. The archaeological traces of Sundaland's human history are still elusive, but the region's myths are anything but. Across Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, there are stories of ancient kingdoms drowned by the sea. In some, these cities are punished for their arrogance. In others, the flood is an unstoppable natural force. In Java, the legend of Nibi Roro Kidul, the Queen of the Southern Sea, speaks of a powerful ruler whose domain swallows anyone who disrespects it, perhaps a symbolic memory of the ocean's inexorable advance. Then there is Mu, a lost continent said to have stretched across the Pacific, but often linked to Southeast Asia by speculative writers. The Mu legend, as we know it, emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries through the writings of Augustus Le Plongeon and later James Churchward, who claimed it was the mother civilization of humanity, destroyed in a cataclysm around 12,000 years ago. Mainstream historians dismiss Mu as pure invention, pointing to the lack of direct evidence. Yet intriguingly, some elements of Churchward's descriptions, tropical, river-rich lowlands now underwater, do align with what we know of Sundaland's Ice Age geography. What makes Sundaland particularly compelling is that its existence is not speculative. Geological and paleo-environmental studies confirm that, during the Pleistocene, the Sunda Shelf was a continuous landmass larger than modern India. Computer models reconstructing ancient coastlines show enormous river systems, such as the North Sunda River, draining vast interior basins before emptying into the South China Sea. Archaeologists have identified ancient shorelines now far below the surface, along with submerged cave systems and coral reefs that grew when sea levels were far lower than today. Recent studies of human genetics add another layer to the story. Many Southeast Asian and Pacific Island populations share deep ancestral links that seem to predate the rise of agriculture. Some researchers propose that Sundaland could have been a center for early human dispersals, with people migrating outward as rising seas fragmented the land into the islands we know today. The Austronesian expansion, which carried people, language, and culture across half the globe from Madagascar to Easter Island, may trace part of its origins to this drowned homeland. Local traditions preserve tantalizing hints of these events. In the Philippines, some indigenous groups tell of a time when their ancestors lived on a great plain to the south, a land that sank beneath the waves. In Borneo, There are stories of ancient stone cities that now lie under the sea, guarded by spirits. In Sumatra, legends speak of great rivers that once flowed through lands now submerged. These are not isolated accounts, but recurring themes across cultures, suggesting that memories of the drowned Sunda shelf might have been passed down orally for millennia. From a cinematic perspective, the Sundaland story offers an extraordinary visual arc. The camera sweeps across a lush Ice Age superland, alive with tropical forests and meandering rivers, before slowly flooding over centuries, its villages and trade routes breaking apart into island chains. What today feels like a fractured geography, thousands of islands separated by water, would have once been the opposite, a single interconnected world. The parallels to Atlantis, Dwarka, and Kumari Kandam are striking, yet Sundaland's fate is even more tangible. It is not a purely mythic place, nor a speculative lost continent dreamed up by 19th century mystics. Its outlines are written in the seabed and confirmed by science. The question is not whether it existed, but who lived there and how advanced their societies might have been. Mainstream archaeology tends to see the people of Ice Age Southeast Asia as small, mobile hunter-gatherer groups. Yet the richness of Sundaland's environment raises the possibility that some communities might have developed more permanent settlements, perhaps even early forms of urbanism. Coastal settlements would have had access to abundant food, freeing time for craft, trade, and cultural development. If these societies did flourish, the rising seas would have erased nearly all traces, burying them under sediment or scattering artifacts beyond recognition. This lack of direct evidence is precisely what keeps Sundaland in the shadows of academic discourse. Excavating under 30 to 50 meters of water is technically challenging and expensive, and the tropical environment accelerates the decay of organic materials. But with advances in underwater archaeology and high-resolution mapping, researchers are beginning to focus more on submerged landscapes. In recent years, isolated finds, stone tools, prehistoric fish traps, and submerged cave art have hinted at the human story waiting to be uncovered beneath the waves. The legend of Mu may never be substantiated in the form Churchward imagined, but the geological reality of Sundaland could represent its true world counterpart, a sprawling tropical heartland erased by the end of the Ice Age, leaving behind nothing but scattered islands, genetic footprints, and the ghost of memory in local myth. It forces us to ask how much of human history has been lost simply because it lies beneath the sea. From here, the narrative moves eastward across the Pacific to islands that rise like stepping stones from the world's largest ocean. Here, too, are legends of lost homelands, mighty voyagers, and cities swallowed by the sea. The Polynesian memory of Hawaii, the Micronesian tales of Lemu and Kapihan, and the monumental stonework of Nan Madol all invite us to consider whether the Pacific's scattered islands are not just the remnants of volcanic peaks, but the surviving tips of a drowned, interconnected world. The Pacific is a paradox, an ocean so vast it covers a third of the planet, yet dotted with tiny islands that seem impossibly remote from one another. To early European explorers it appeared almost empty, a scattering of volcanic peaks and coral atolls separated by thousands of kilometers of open water. But to the Polynesians, Micronesians, and Melanesians, this was not a void. It was a connected world, a sea of pathways linking communities across unimaginable distances, and like every other great cultural sphere on Earth, it holds within its memory stories of lands that once were homelands, that vanished beneath the waves. Perhaps the most famous of these is Hawaii, the ancestral homeland of the Polynesians. In oral traditions from New Zealand to Hawaii, Hawaii is described as a place across the sea, the origin point from which the people came, and to which they return after death. Some versions place it as a real island, others make it more spiritual, a realm between life and death. But among certain navigators, Hawaii is spoken of as if it were once a tangible location, now inaccessible, perhaps destroyed or submerged. Whether literal or symbolic, its role is clear. It is the axis of identity, the shared first home that unites a people spread across 16 million square kilometers of ocean. In Micronesia, the island of Pohnpei hosts one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites on the planet, Nan Madol. Built on a series of artificial islets connected by canals, it has been called the Venice of the Pacific. The site's megalithic architecture, massive basalt columns weighing several tons each, raises immediate questions about how such a construction could have been achieved with pre-industrial technology. Oral histories say it was built by twin sorcerer brothers who used magic to fly the stones into place. Archaeologists date much of the site to between 1200 and 1500 CE, but some local traditions insist it is far older, built upon even earlier foundations. The mystery deepens when you consider that Nan Madol is not unique. Across the Pacific are scattered examples of monumental stone architecture: the Trilithon of Tonga, the Mare temples of Tahiti, the platform complexes of Easter Island. These are not carbon copies of one another, but they share a common impulse to build in stone on a massive scale, in a region where timber and thatch were the more practical materials for everyday life. Why expend such effort unless marking something deeply important? Some fringe theorists, particularly in the mid-20th century, linked Nan Madol to the idea of Lemuria, or Mu, suggesting it was the last surviving city of a drowned Pacific continent. Mainstream archaeology rejects this, pointing out the clear cultural and chronological links between Nan Madol and other Micronesian sites. Yet the suggestion that Nan Madol's location might have once been part of a larger, now submerged landmass is not entirely implausible when viewed through the lens of Ice Age geography. Like Sundaland, large portions of Micronesia's shallow seas would have been exposed when sea levels were lower. The site could sit atop land that was once coastal rather than marine. In many Pacific traditions, there are stories of islands that walk or sink. Some refer to volcanic activity, not surprising in the tectonically active Ring of Fire, but others seem to recall slow submergence over generations. The Marshall Islands have legends of large islands that lay down in the water and became the low atolls seen today. In the Solomon Islands, people tell of entire villages that slid into the sea after the ocean ate the shore. These are not tales of sudden disaster like a tsunami. They hint at gradual sea level rise, exactly the kind of process that reshaped Sundaland. The Polynesian expansion itself may be rooted in environmental change. Some scholars suggest that shifts in climate and resource availability, possibly tied to local flooding of coastal lands, pushed communities to take to the ocean in search of new homes. The skill of Pacific navigation is almost without parallel. Voyagers used the stars, the sun, the shape of waves, the color of water, and the flight of birds to cross thousands of kilometers without modern instruments. Such mastery would have been vital for those seeking to replace lands they had lost. From a cinematic standpoint, the Pacific's lost places invite sweeping visuals: the deep blue vastness broken by green volcanic peaks, outrigger canoes cutting across endless horizons, and beneath the surface, stone structures overgrown with coral, silent witnesses to a vanished past. Above the water, chants and dances preserve the names of islands no longer on any map. Below, the ocean holds whatever remains of them. Where the Pacific myths take on their most haunting resonance is in their blend of the real and the legendary. Hawaii might be both a physical island and a metaphysical place. Nan Madol might be both an archaeological site and the ghost of something much older. And in the stories of sunken islands scattered across Polynesia and Micronesia, we may be hearing fragments of memory, a transoceanic chorus, singing about a time when the sea claimed more than just shorelines. The idea of Mu as a vast Pacific continent is almost certainly wrong in geological terms. Plate tectonics leaves no room for such a landmass to have existed in recent prehistory. But as a cultural concept, Mu may be an amalgam of many smaller truths: drowned lowlands from Micronesia to Polynesia, oral histories of ancestral homelands, and the striking fact that the Pacific peoples remember and speak of places that no longer exist. The transition from Sundaland to the Pacific is not just geographical, it's thematic. In Southeast Asia, the evidence for a drowned Ice Age landscape is scientific fact. In the Pacific, we have cultural memory as the primary carrier of that same idea. This shift from physical to oral evidence is critical because it mirrors how human history itself survives when landscapes are erased, not in stone or bone, but in the stories people tell. By weaving the Pacific's lost lands into our broader investigation, we see that the phenomenon of pre-Ice Age and early post-Ice Age city building may not have been isolated to a few regions. Instead, it might have been a global tendency, wherever humans had stable environments and abundant resources, a tendency repeatedly interrupted by rising seas. The scattered stone ruins and persistent myths may be the surviving fingerprints of a much larger human story, one that spans oceans and connects cultures in ways conventional history rarely considers. From here, our journey will swing back toward the Americas to the Atlantic's far side, where a different kind of lost world hides in plain sight. Along the coasts of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, underwater archaeologists have begun to map structures that seem out of place for their supposed age. And in the jungles of Central and South America, legends speak of cities that predate the known civilizations, cities swallowed not by the ocean, but by time itself. If the Pacific teaches us that the memory of lost lands can survive as myth, the Americas show us how those myths can take physical form, buried under silt, mangroves, and centuries of jungle. The standard history of the Americas begins with the Clovis culture around 13,000 years ago, with advanced cities not appearing until millennia later, the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, but just as we saw in Sundaland and the Pacific, the archaeological record here is beginning to betray whispers of a deeper past, one in which complex societies may have existed long before the official start of civilization. Along the Gulf of Mexico, the warm, shallow coastal waters are slowly yielding secrets. Off the coast of Cuba, in the early 2000s, a Canadian-Cuban research team, using sonar mapping, stumbled upon what appeared to be geometric stone formations 650 meters below the surface. The site, near the Guanahacabibes Peninsula, seemed to display patterns that could be interpreted as plazas, pyramids, and avenues, an underwater cityscape. While some experts suggest these could be natural formations, the sheer symmetry and scale challenge that assumption. If the structures are artificial, they must predate the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower, a time when this part of the Caribbean was dry land. This find is not unique. In the Bahamas, off Bimini, divers have explored a feature called the Bimini Road, a series of massive flat stones arranged in what looks like a man-made causeway. Mainstream geologists argue it's the result of natural beach rock fracturing, but others point to its regularity, multi-layered structure, and alignment as evidence of human construction. Whatever the case, these submerged features spark the same question: if they are man-made, who built them, and when? Further south, in the Yucatan Peninsula, the cenotes, deep sinkholes connected to subterranean rivers, preserve a time capsule of the region's human past. While many were ritual sites for the Maya, some contain remains far older. In Hoyo Negro, a flooded cave system, divers discovered the skeleton of a teenage girl dated to around 13,000 years ago, alongside Ice Age animal remains. She lived during a time when the Yucatan was not a jungle, but savanna. Could there have been organized communities here then later erased by changing climate and rising seas? Inland, the story shifts from drowned coastlines to swallowed cities. The dense jungles of Central and South America hide more than just wildlife. For centuries, explorers returned from the Amazon with tales of stone cities, vast causeways, and complex earthworks. Most of these were dismissed as exaggerations or fabrications, as the prevailing belief was that the rainforest's poor soils could not sustain large populations. But recent LIDAR, light detection and ranging scans have upended that assumption. In the Mosquitia region of Honduras, LiDAR revealed a network of plazas, mounds, and terraces hidden beneath the canopy, a lost city that some have called the City of the Jaguar. The structures date to around 1,000 to 1,500 years ago, but their complexity suggests they could be part of a tradition stretching back further. In the Amazon basin, LiDAR surveys have uncovered massive geometric earthworks, some dating back at least 2,000 years, with patterns that hint at astronomical alignments. These finds have forced archaeologists to consider that much of the Amazon was a managed inhabited landscape before European contact, perhaps even before the traditionally accepted start of agriculture there. What ties these jungle and underwater mysteries together is the possibility of continuity, that there may have been civilizations, or at least organized large-scale societies, in the Americas during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene periods, traditionally thought to be populated only by scattered hunter-gatherer bands. If so, these would have been among the people who built cities before the Ice Age ended, and their works would have been vulnerable to the same catastrophic erasures we've seen elsewhere. The indigenous oral traditions of the Americas are as rich as those of the Pacific. The Mesoamerican Quiche Maya Popol Vuh speaks of earlier creations of humankind that were destroyed by floods before the current age. The Hopi of the American Southwest tell of previous worlds that ended in deluge, forcing survivors to climb into the current one through a reed. In the Andes, Inca myths describe a time when the land was in darkness, and the god Viracocha brought forth a new order after the destruction of an earlier race. These are not simply poetic flourishes, they may be cultural memories of environmental upheavals witnessed by ancestors at the end of the Ice Age. The cinematic pull of the Americas' hidden past lies in the visual contrasts. Sleek LiDAR scans revealing perfect geometric shapes beneath chaotic jungle, divers gliding past coral-crusted stone blocks in blue Caribbean depths, the endless Amazon, where every tree might hide the remains of a plaza, a pyramid, or a road. Each image drives home the same realization that vast chapters of human history here remain unwritten. Yet, unlike in Sundaland or the Pacific, the Americas offer a twist. Many of these lost sites are not thousands of meters deep or completely erased. They're still there, concealed, awaiting rediscovery. The loss here was not just physical, but cultural. The arrival of Europeans, the collapse of indigenous populations through disease and conflict, and the reshaping of landscapes for agriculture and industry have all layered new erasures atop the old. We are not just dealing with a pre-Ice Age mystery, we are dealing with a mystery hidden behind centuries of deliberate forgetting. As we link the Americas to our global investigation, the pattern emerges ever more clearly. In every inhabited region of the late Pleistocene world, there are signs, however faint, that humans had begun to gather in ways we would recognize as urban or proto-urban. They built in stone, in earth, in wood. They created networks, trade, and ceremonial centers. And when the seas rose, when the climate shifted, or when catastrophe struck, their cities vanished, leaving us only with submerged ruins, jungle-covered mounds, and stories. From the Americas, our journey will turn once more, this time into the realm where myth, archaeology, and geology collide most explosively, the North Atlantic. It is there, in the cold waters between Europe and the Americas, that one of humanity's most enduring legends, Atlantis, has been anchored in both imagination and controversy. But as we will see, behind the familiar tale lies a web of evidence that might connect every lost world we've explored so far. Atlantis. Even the name carries a gravitational pull, a magnet for dreamers, skeptics, and adventurers alike. For over 2,000 years, this story, first recorded by Plato in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, has stood as the ultimate legend of a lost civilization. To most mainstream historians, it is a philosophical allegory, Plato's metaphor for hubris and moral decay. To others, it is a garbled memory of a real place, a city, perhaps even a continent, swallowed by the sea. In Plato's account, Atlantis was a powerful island nation that existed 9,000 years before his own time, placing its destruction around 11,600 years ago, the exact time frame of the Younger Dryas, the sudden climatic shift that slammed the planet at the end of the Ice Age. The parallels to our investigation so far are impossible to ignore: a high culture, great works of engineering, a sudden catastrophe, and then disappearance beneath the waves. The conventional rebuttal is simple. Plato invented the story. But what if he didn't? What if his source, the Egyptian priests who supposedly told the tale to the Greek statesman Solon centuries earlier, were preserving an oral history of an actual event passed down from survivors of a global cataclysm? That possibility gains weight when we map his description against what we now know of post-Ice Age geography. Plato describes Atlantis as lying beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean, larger than Libya and Asia combined, and rich with navigable canals, concentric harbors, and fertile plains. The question becomes, could such a place have existed, and if so, where? Over the past century, researchers have proposed dozens of candidate locations: the Azores, the Canary Islands, the Bahamas, even Antarctica. Each carries fragments of the puzzle, but all share a common problem: they must fit within the geological and archaeological constraints of the late Pleistocene. The Azores, for example, sit atop the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a tectonically active region. Some sonar surveys have revealed curious shapes and apparent ruins in the surrounding seabed, but deep water confirmation is scarce. The Canary Islands hold older stone constructions, but most date well into the Holocene. Yet, there are hints that something larger may once have existed here. The so-called Atlantis Massif, a massive underwater mountain range, contains strange flat terraces and features that, while almost certainly geological, eerily mimic human-made architecture. Nearby submerged shorelines from the last glacial maximum trace the outlines of now-vanished coastal plains, some of which could have been home to human settlements. The real turning point comes when we match the timing of Atlantis's supposed destruction with evidence from paleoclimatology. Around 11,600 years ago, the Younger Dryas ended abruptly, with global temperatures rising as much as 10 degrees Celsius in just decades. This warming caused massive ice sheets to melt, releasing torrents of fresh water into the oceans and driving sea levels upward by tens of meters in a geological blink. Such an event would have drowned any low-lying coastal civilizations, exactly as Plato describes. Some modern researchers, like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, have pushed this link further, proposing that the Younger Dryas was triggered by a cosmic impact, the breaking up of a comet or asteroid, scattering fragments across the northern hemisphere. Evidence cited includes peaks of platinum in ice cores, widespread layers of microscopic glass spherules, and massive burn scars across North America. If true, the destruction of Atlantis becomes part of a much larger story: a planetary catastrophe that reshaped coastlines, collapsed ecosystems, and erased much of humanity's early architectural legacy. Skeptics argue this is overreach, that we are taking a cautionary myth and grafting it onto geological events to create an irresistible narrative. But what they cannot deny is the growing list of parallels between Plato's account and newly uncovered prehistoric sites. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, for instance, dates to around 11,600 years ago, the same time Plato gives for Atlantis's fall, and shows that complex, organized societies existed well before the rise of traditional civilizations. Underwater sites like Dwarka in India, Yonaguni in Japan, and the Bimini Road in the Bahamas echo the idea of advanced coastal cultures swallowed by rising seas. Here's where the contrast sharpens. Mainstream history tells us that humanity's first cities arose in Mesopotamia around 6,000 years ago, in Egypt around 5,000 years ago, But the hidden truth emerging from the intersection of archaeology, geology, and ancient texts is that the blueprint for urban life may have been laid down thousands of years earlier, and that Atlantis, or something like it, could have been one of those blueprints. The legend's persistence is itself a clue. Myths die when they lose relevance, but Atlantis has survived, morphing across cultures and centuries. In medieval Europe, it became a cautionary Christian allegory. In the Renaissance, it was revived as a utopian ideal. In the Age of Exploration, it was tied to rumors of golden cities in the New World. And in the modern era, it has become a symbol for a lost chapter of human history, one that science is only now beginning to reread. Our cinematic lens here zooms wide, a storm-lashed Atlantic horizon, lightning splitting the clouds, revealing for a moment a ghostly shoreline beneath the waves. Then we cut to archaeological digs, ice cores being drilled, deep-sea rock scanning seafloors for the faint geometry of vanished harbor. This is no longer just a story of one lost city, it is the story of a pattern repeated across the globe of civilizations born in the Ice Age and erased at its end. Atlantis serves as the bridge in our journey. It links the flooded plains of Sunderland to the stone roads of the Pacific, the jungled mounds of the Americas, to the submerged terraces of the Mediterranean. Whether or not Atlantis itself ever existed as Plato described, the underlying reality it represents, a global surge of early human complexity, abruptly destroyed, is now supported by mounting evidence. From here, our path turns toward the closing argument of this entire investigation. The final chapters will weave together everything we've seen, the sites, the myths, the science, and the undeniable human fingerprints beneath the sediment of prehistory. We will confront the possibility that the end of the Ice Age was not just a natural transition, but a mass cultural extinction, one that may have pushed humanity back thousands of years. And we will ask the most dangerous question of all: if such a collapse happened once, could it happen again? The threads have been scattered across oceans, buried under silt, and hidden in myths, but now they begin to weave into a single sweeping tapestry. We've journeyed from the icy plains of Siberia to the submerged valleys of Southeast Asia, from the jungled mounds of South America to the enigmatic seafloors of the Atlantic. What seemed at first like isolated mysteries, a temple here, a stone road there, a story told around a fire, now form a pattern far too precise to dismiss. To make sense of it, we need to do what no single archaeological dig site can: compress the last 20,000 years into a continuous timeline, using evidence from every continent. This isn't about cherry-picking anomalies. It's about laying the known facts alongside the contested ones and watching the gaps between them close. We start at the tail end of the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago. Sea levels are more than 120 meters lower than today, exposing vast stretches of coastal land now buried underwater. Humanity is scattered but not primitive. Hunter-gatherer societies show signs of regional networks, trade in obsidian, and the earliest megalithic experiments. The coastlines now drowned would have been prime territory: mild climates, rich fishing grounds, and easy access to inland resources. Between 15,000 and 12,800 years ago, something shifts. Cave paintings grow more complex. Monumental architecture emerges at places like Göbekli Tepe, suggesting ritual and social organization at a scale unthinkable just centuries before. Something, whether environmental stability, a cultural spark, or outside influence, is accelerating human complexity. Then, around 12,800 years ago, the hammer falls: the Younger Dryas. Earth plunges back into near-glacial conditions. Ice core data shows massive climate disruption, while black mats and high-temperature spherules appear across continents, potential fingerprints of a cosmic impact. If this was a meteor or comet fragmenting in the atmosphere, the resulting shock waves, wildfires, and floods would have devastated any early cities, especially those along coasts and river deltas. The disaster lasts over 1,000 years. Cultures either adapt or vanish. Oral traditions from Native American tribes, Aboriginal Australians, and Polynesian navigators echo the same story. The sea rose, the land burned, the sky turned to fire. Archaeologists traditionally treat these as metaphor, but the environmental record now suggests they may be literal memories, carried across millennia through unbroken chains of storytelling. Then, at 11,600 years ago, the very date Plato gives for Atlantis's destruction, the climate warms abruptly. Ice sheets collapse into the oceans, driving sea levels upward at catastrophic rates. Entire continental shelves are lost. If you wanted to erase a city from history, there is no more efficient method than drowning it beneath 50 meters of seawater. And this is where the fragments reappear, scattered across the globe. In India, submerged cities like Dwarka preserve stone walls and streets beneath the waves. In Japan, the Yonaguni Monument presents stair-like terraces in deep water. In the Mediterranean, ruins off Malta's coast hint at older foundations beneath the famous temples. Across the Caribbean and the Bahamas, the Bimini Road continues to fuel debate. Crucially, these sites share architectural motifs, cyclopean masonry, advanced stone-cutting astronomical alignments. They are not the signatures of a single culture. They appear in South America, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific, often in places supposedly cut off from each other by vast oceans. If we accept the orthodox timeline, these are independent inventions, but widen the lens, and they look like echoes of a shared architectural tradition, carried by survivors of a pre-Ice Age global network. Trade routes, too, leave their ghostly marks. Anatolian obsidian turns up thousands of kilometers from its source. Andean quipu-like systems appear in unexpected regions. Myths of a golden age before the flood, found from Mesopotamia's Atrahasis to the Maya Popol Vuh, may be refracted memories of this lost era. When plotted on a world map, these anomalies cluster along what would have been prime coastlines during the Ice Age. The missing link is devastatingly simple: those coasts are now underwater. Mainstream archaeology focuses on what can be excavated on land, but that is only the tip of the iceberg. Literally, the rest of the story lies beneath the waves, in landscapes we've barely begun to survey. Technology is finally catching up. Autonomous underwater drones, side-scan sonar, and LiDAR are revealing drowned river channels, ancient shorelines, even possible man-made structures. Each new survey chips away at the argument that nothing of significance existed before 6,000 years ago. Instead, the evidence suggests a long prelude to civilization, one violently interrupted. And this brings us to the core tension: the known history taught in schools versus the hidden truth emerging from this global pattern. The known history insists cities are a post-Neolithic invention. The hidden truth points to an earlier cycle: cultures that achieved urban-scale organization, then lost to rising seas and violent climate shifts, remembered only as myths until science began to catch their scent again. As we align these timelines, something else emerges, a sobering possibility. If the end of the Ice Age destroyed a global network once, it could happen again. Our own world is built along coasts, dependent on stable climates, vulnerable to the same forces, cosmic, climatic, and geological, that reshaped Earth 12,000 years ago. The past is not just a mystery, it is a warning. In cinematic terms, this is the reveal scene. Imagine a rotating globe filling the screen, layers peeling away to expose submerged coastlines as they looked 15,000 years ago. As the globe turns, each region lights up with archaeological finds, mythic origins, and geological data, sinking to the same catastrophic window. The effect is overwhelming. We are not looking at random curiosities, but at the fragmented ruins of a connected human story, one whose first chapter was torn out by the sea. From here, the path leads to the conclusion. The final section will not only summarize the evidence, but confront its implications, what it means for our understanding of human history, why mainstream academia resists this narrative, and what future discoveries might finally force it into the light. And we'll leave the audience with the most dangerous question of all. If civilizations existed before the Ice Age ended, then who were they, and how much of their legacy still lies waiting beneath the waves? The camera lingers on the ocean, still, silent, impenetrable. Beneath those waves, the ruins we've traced in whispers and fragments lie in darkness, waiting for light. We have followed a trail that began with improbable stonework in the highlands, led us through myth and geology, and ended in the drowned corridors of an ancient world. The question now is not whether something was lost, but how much. Our journey began with the official story, a clean, linear march from caves to cities in just the last few thousand years. Along the way, we stumbled on cracks in that neat narrative, anomalies too stubborn to ignore, artifacts that refused to fit the timeline, myths that seemed to carry geological truth. At first they were curiosities, now together they are a chorus. They sing of a chapter in human history that we have yet to read. The contrast could not be sharper. The known history is secure, reassuring. Civilization is young, born after the Ice Age thawed. The hidden truth is raw, dangerous. Human ingenuity may have sparked cities long before the climate stabilized, only for nature to wipe them from the map. This isn't just an academic debate. It's about whether the roots of our story stretch deeper than we dare to imagine. The evidence is circumstantial, yes, but it is mounting. Align the myths of great floods, the abrupt climate events in the geological record, the sudden appearances of advanced architecture, and the curious clustering of ruins in now submerged coastal zones, and a picture forms. It is not the picture we've been taught to see, but it explains more than it contradicts. It suggests that civilization is not a singular invention, but a cycle, one that can rise and fall with the tides, both literal and metaphorical. And here is where the weight of this story presses hardest. Because if such civilizations existed before, then their fate could mirror our own. They too might have believed their cities permanent, their technology sufficient, their mastery of nature assured. And then a shift in the climate, a cosmic strike, a rising ocean, and everything was gone, leaving only whispers for the future to find. For modern humanity, the parallel is chilling. Our skyscrapers, our satellites, our global trade, all rest on the same fragile environmental foundations as those lost cities. The same melting ice, the same restless tectonics, the same unpredictable sky. We like to think of ourselves as invincible, but the ruins beneath the waves tell a different story, one where even the brightest lights can be extinguished, leaving only traces for those who come after. This is why the search matters, not just to satisfy curiosity, not just to win an argument about dates and timelines, but to understand the full scope of what we are and what we could lose. If our ancestors once built cities before the Ice Age ended, then their story is not separate from ours. It is ours. It is the prologue we never read. The resistance to this idea is understandable. Science demands caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But science also thrives on bold questions. If we refuse to look beyond the current paradigm, we risk missing the very discoveries that could redefine it. Every sonar scan of a drowned shoreline, every reinterpreted myth, every stray artifact pulled from the depths brings us closer to a truth that may be far stranger and far older than we expect. Imagine what might still be waiting: a harbor wall beneath the Black Sea, a stone-paved plaza off the coast of Borneo, a carved stele in the Caribbean shallows, each one a breadcrumb from a vanished table, each one a voice calling from the deep, and somewhere perhaps, the city itself, intact enough to tell its story, to finally bridge the gap between myth and history. Until then, we live in the shadow of that missing chapter. We walk our own cities, knowing that others may have walked theirs, looking at the same stars, worrying over the same storms. They are not just ghosts from the past, They are mirrors, and in their reflection, we see both the fragility and the brilliance of human ambition. So we end where we began, with a question. Not the simple question of whether Atlantis existed, or whether the Yonaguni monument was carved by human hands, but the deeper, more unsettling one. How old is civilization really? And if it is older than we think, what does that mean for the way we see ourselves? The waves roll on, indifferent, but beneath them lies a truth that will not stay buried forever. The people who built cities before the Ice Age ended are still speaking, in stone, in story, in silence. And one day, when we finally listen closely enough, we may hear their voices clearly. Until that day comes, the ocean keeps its secrets. But as every diver, explorer, and archaeologist knows, secrets do not last forever. The past is not lost, it is only waiting to be found. The story doesn't end with the credits. Even as we speak, ships are scanning coastlines once walked by people we can barely imagine. Drones are mapping drowned valleys. Archaeologists are sifting through mud for shards that refuse to fit into the tidy puzzle of history. Somewhere in those data streams, in those sealed crates, in museum basements, the next clue is waiting. The last 2 decades have seen a quiet revolution in our ability to see the past. Technologies like LiDAR have already rewritten the maps of ancient Central America and Southeast Asia, revealing entire lost cities beneath jungles we once thought were untouched. Applied to the oceans, to those vast blue archives, the same technology could shatter the last resistance to the idea of pre-sage civilizations. The barrier isn't just physical, it's mental. It's the willingness to look where the old maps end. Consider the shallow seas of the Sunda Shelf, stretching between Indonesia and mainland Asia. When the Ice Age seas were lower, this was a fertile plain the size of India, home to rivers, forests, and perhaps cities. Today it's invisible, buried under 40 meters of water. Or take the Doggerland region in the North Sea, which we now know was inhabited before being swallowed by rising seas. If such places existed in Europe and Asia, why not elsewhere? The deeper we dig, or dive, the more the lines between myth and archaeology blur. The flood narratives in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Genesis story of Noah have long been dismissed as symbolic. Yet geological records show abrupt sea level rises and catastrophic flooding events at precisely the timeframes these myths describe. Even conservative scholars are beginning to admit the possibility that such stories could encode real events, witnessed by survivors. And here is the key point. Survivors carry knowledge. Even if the cities themselves were lost, their builders may have carried their skills, their stories, their architectural styles into the next age. This could explain why megalithic traditions appear suddenly and fully formed in widely separated regions after 10,000 BCE. Instead of independent invention, we may be looking at the echoes of a displaced and scattered people. Of course, not every anomaly is a smoking gun. Natural formations can mimic human handiwork. Myths evolve and blend. Radiocarbon dating can be tricky when dealing with submerged organic material. But the scale of the mystery is what makes it compelling and urgent. The deeper truth is unlikely to be revealed in one spectacular discovery. It will come from the slow accumulation of small, stubborn facts until the old narrative can no longer hold. Funding is another obstacle. Land archaeology already struggles for resources. Underwater archaeology is exponentially more expensive. Many promising sites remain unexplored simply because they lie in politically unstable regions, deep waters, or zones where commercial interests, like fishing and drilling, take priority. In this sense, the story of the people who built cities before the Ice Age ended is also a story about us, about what we choose to value, preserve, and pursue. Yet the momentum is building. International collaborations are beginning to target drowned coastlines. Private initiatives by explorers and filmmakers are bringing public attention to sites that would otherwise languish in obscurity. And in an era when the internet can turn a single artifact into a viral sensation overnight, The idea of an Ice Age civilization is no longer confined to fringe discussions. It is entering the cultural mainstream, step by step. If history has taught us anything, it's that the extraordinary becomes ordinary the moment evidence tips past a certain point. There was a time when the idea of dinosaurs was laughed out of serious science, when continental drift was dismissed as fantasy, when the ruins of Troy were considered pure legend. Each of these impossible ideas is now foundational knowledge. The same could happen for pre-Ice Age civilizations if we have the patience, the technology, and the courage to keep looking. And perhaps that is the real legacy of the people we've been chasing. Whether they were farmers on the lost plains of Sunda, stonecutters in now drowned valleys, or navigators steering reed boats across an Ice Age sea, their existence challenges our own assumptions about the limits of human achievement. They remind us that civilization is not a singular miracle but a recurring possibility, one that can be nurtured, lost, and rediscovered. So the next time you stand at the edge of the sea, looking out over the waves, remember the horizon is not the end. Beneath those waters lies another world, one built by hands like ours, guided by minds like ours, shaped by dreams, not so different from the ones we carry today. We may never find every city they built, but we can still honor their story by refusing to let it vanish again. The tides took their homes but not the possibility of finding them. And as long as we keep searching, the past will always have a chance to rise again. Night falls over the ocean. The last streaks of light fade into a deep, endless blue, and the surface becomes a mirror reflecting the stars. Somewhere far below, where sunlight never reaches, stones lie laid by hands long gone. They are silent now, but once they rang with footsteps, voices, the clatter of work, the pulse of life. We have traced the edges of their story through broken walls, through whispers in myth, through patterns in the landscape that make no sense without human intent. We have followed those traces across continents and millennia, through deserts and jungles, through archives and laboratories. And yet, for all our searching, the heart of their world remains hidden, a shadow behind the veil of time. The world they knew is gone. Ice carved away their mountains, oceans swallowed their harbors. Rivers changed their course. In our age, we like to think that time is a line, that the past recedes steadily, one year after another. But what we've learned is that time can also collapse, folding civilizations under layers of water and stone until they vanish almost overnight. We began with the comfort of a clear, established history. Civilization is recent, fragile, and linear. But the path has led us to a truth that is less tidy and far more haunting, that human ambition is older, more resilient, and more cyclical than we dared to believe. Cities have risen before, perhaps many times, only to fall and be forgotten. And if that has happened before, it can happen again. This is the double edge of discovery. On one side, the realization that we are part of a lineage of dreamers and builders stretching further into the past than we ever imagined. On the other, warning, the knowledge that every city, no matter how magnificent, stands on borrowed time. The ocean does not hurry. It erases slowly but completely. Each wave is a small act of forgetting, a caress over the ruins below. But the ocean also preserves, sealing artifacts in cold, oxygen-poor darkness, holding them safe until someone dares to look. That is the paradox of the deep. It destroys and it remembers. Perhaps this is why the story of the people who built cities before the Ice Age ended resonates so deeply. It is not just about them, it is about us. About what we choose to remember, what we choose to protect, and how easily those choices can be undone. If they could stand here beside us, they might tell us that progress is not invincibility, that stability is an illusion, and that every age believes it will endure. And yet there is also hope. Because while their cities are gone, we have found their shadows. While their names are lost, we have kept their questions alive. Every sonar scan, every myth retold, every expedition into the blue is an act of defiance against forgetting. We search not only because we want to know, but because we refuse to let them vanish without a trace. In the end, perhaps the greatest tribute we can give them is not a monument, but an unbroken chain of curiosity, a determination to keep asking, to keep exploring, to keep listening to the whispers of the deep. We may never learn the full shape of their lives, but in seeking them we find a sharper awareness of our own. The tide turns. The stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow will come, and with it the same ocean that hides and reveals in its own time. Somewhere beneath it the stones remain, waiting for the day when history finally reaches back far enough to take their hand. Until then we walk our own streets, build our own towers, and tell our own stories, knowing that one day, perhaps, someone else will go looking for us.